All right, hello. I am the last talk. You can all applaud that. You get to leave after this. Or see a movie, stay, whatever. All right, so actually, if anybody is maybe as excited as you are to get done with it, it's me. I'm 8 hours of jet lag, ready for a nap. But this is what we're talking about today. Before we get into that, this is where I'm coming from. If I were to ask you before putting this up if you could actually identify where Iowa was, I'm guessing there wouldn't be that many hands. But that's okay. This is fun. I think if there's something to take from this, it speaks to kind of the universality of DevOps and the inclusivity of it. You know, this is kind of an unknown place. Iowa is about 92% farmland, and pigs outnumber humans 4-1. So it's, not where you would think of having a tech company, but here I am. And likewise, actually, what maybe even makes this funnier is if you ask people in my office, the company I work for, Workiva, and say, I told them I'm going to Lithuania to give a talk about technology. Most of them would go, Lithuania? In fact, many of them did. They said, Lithuania? What? Why? Tech there? What is this about? So from one unlikely place to another, let me just say that I'm very privileged to be here. I feel privileged to be here and glad that we can talk about DevOps today. So let's talk about DevOps. It's funny to me because it feels like every time we do, we have to define DevOps. It's like the big joke that we're all in this room and have no idea why we're here. We have to define it every time. A very smart person, smarter than me, said that people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. There's a whole TED talk on this. It's better than my talk. If I could just put that up, I would. But I have something else to tell you here. But I want to start with the why. I want to start with why all this is important. Yes, I know my talk is on monitoring, alerting, and paging. But I want to relate it to DevOps, right? Why is that important kind of in the scheme of DevOps? Something that I've learned as I've kind of talked to lots of people about DevOps is that size matters. In terms of your company, where you come from, your perspective on DevOps is kind of colored somewhat by the size of the company that you work for, how many devs are in your organization. Kind of by raise of hands, if we could, how many of you work for sort of very small organizations, what I would consider very small organizations, like less than 10 developers or so? Between 10 and 50? Between 50 and 100? Between 100 and 500? Wow, that's a lot of hands. And over 500. Wow. Okay, so we have some big organization represented here. Workiva has, we're in the between 100 and 500, closer to 500 developers. So we're a fairly sizable organization, and it looks like actually similar to what's represented here. So maybe you'll see this perspective as one that kind of mirrors your own. When DevOps was first introduced, it's sort of this, kind of had this idea that it's everybody, like we kind of heard it said Wild West, right? Like all the devs work on all the things, everybody has to know everything. The perspective that we have is a little different. My company, we're fairly new, but we have a platform, go us, hooray. That's not really the point of bringing that up, but the point is that our developers are sort of, I guess you could say siloed. They're in highly dependent, highly intertwined product lines. So we have a lot of application developers in their product lines, and then we have these teams that cut across all of the rest of it. So that's you, that's me, that's us, that's DevOps, right? If we were to kind of break it up, that's kind of how it is. But there's a lot going on in here. There's a lot going on. This is sort of how we run things. We have an information security team, and I'm simplifying everything everybody does here. They're going to see this and go, he's wrong. That's an awful representation of us, and I apologize, but I'm simplifying. We have release management, and they do SDLC compliance and CI/CD, things like that. We have a test dev organization. We have infrastructure engineering, of which I'm a part. We have SRE and operations, and other people that I probably forgot, right, that do important things. Lots of important things. My team is this infrastructure engineering group. We're sort of an all-purpose hit squad. We do kind of whatever needs doing that's engineering and kind of infrastructure related. We recently took everything from a homebrewed container orchestration management system to EKS, and now all of our production systems are running in Kubernetes in production on EKS, AWS. That was a big lift, but that's the kind of thing we do. They are experts in CloudFormation, experts in Kubernetes configuration, many things. But they're not experts in all of this. Are any of you? Probably not. If you are, we're hiring. Come talk to me after. I'm very interested. But there's a lot here, right? So how can we really expect all of our developers, all of our application developers, to understand all of this, have all of this down pat, but also be able to write applications? And we can't. So the truth, the kind of sad truth, maybe not, is that really fully integrated DevOps, which I think a lot of people would say was maybe never really the premise to start with, but is sort of an idea that at least I had at one point, is challenging. I'd maybe even rewrite this and say that it's impossible at scale because it incurs insurmountable knowledge overhead. No one person can know all these things or be that knowledgeable to actually do all of this themselves. The full stack engineer has too big a stack right now. So that's not DevOps. It can't be. But what is? Again, haha, we don't know. We're all here. Let's talk about the definition. I'll give you part of it, or at least my take on it. 3 things. It's empathy. It's getting a clicker to work. Collaboration. And it's automation. And before you strike a semantic argument with me and say, automation isn't a value, you're right. It's not. It's a thing we value. It's like the Polar Bear Club values fearlessness and camaraderie and jumping in cold water. We love empathy, collaboration, and automation. So this is the why. This is why we do what we do. And these are the values that I hope we can align to as we talk about monitoring, alerting, and paging. All right. I eat my peas with honey. This is one of my boss's favorite things to quote all the time. I'm going to recite poetry to you now. I eat my peas with honey. I've done it all my life. It makes the peas taste funny, but it keeps them on my knife. Let's continue with this theme. I told my teenage niece to go get me a newspaper. She laughed at me and said, "Oh, uncle, you're so old. Just use my phone." So I slammed her phone against the wall to kill a spider. We're going to get into the interactive portion now. If you are watching this later, like on YouTube or something, feel free to shout out the answer at the screen. You'll be just as wrong as everyone else. What is this? Just shout it out. A hammer. Wrong. This is a Birmingham screwdriver. The people that laughed are the Brits. We've just found them. The joke is that people from Birmingham are simple. They're stupid. They see a screw and they need to pound it in with a nail. It's not my joke. Don't shoot the messenger. Let's try this again. What is this? Dull. What was that? Not a hammer. You're supposed to say a Birmingham screwdriver, and then I was going to tell you were wrong again. It's a hammer. Come on, guys. Get with it. All right. This is a hammer, but it's a specific type of hammer. It's a claw hammer, right? What's this? A hammer. A different type of hammer. It's a ball peen hammer. What's this? A hammer. It's a sledgehammer. This is a dead blow hammer. This is a mallet, rubber mallet, still a hammer. Another type of hammer. What's this? A hammer for hammering flies and spiders into hard surfaces. What's this? A hammer, a bad hammer, but a hammer. It has an awkward handle and the striking surface doesn't really work real well, but it's a hammer, right? Every tool is a hammer. This is actually the title of Adam Savage's book. If you don't know who Adam Savage is, he's a mythbuster, was a mythbuster, and one of my personal heroes. I hope to be a more handsome version of him when I grow up. And this is the title of his book, and it's a joke, right? The joke is that every tool is a hammer if maybe you don't actually really know what it's really for. You can use almost anything as a hammer. You can pound in nails with your fist if you want. It'll be bloody and it'll hurt a lot, but you can do it. So why are we talking about this? Why do I talk about hammers? Why all of the, insulting Birmingham and talking about peas and honey? I think that to talk about observability, to talk about monitoring, alerting, and paging, it's good for us to talk a little bit about the tools. Your tools. And how do I know that they're your tools? They're your tools because every successful software company has somebody, whether it's a team, whether it's a person, depending on your scale maybe, that is writing monitors, that is setting alerting thresholds, that is answering a pager. That's how we keep the lights on. And that's you. Am I wrong? It's you. It's us in that layer primarily. But here's the problem. The problem is that our engagement with those tools, our level of engagement with those tools, degrades or even sometimes stops right there with you. How many of you, and you can raise your hand, I'm actually genuinely curious about this, can say that your application developers have instrumented their application code to the same degree that you have instrumented the underlying platform? That's kind of what I thought. There's no hands. And that's not cool, right? That causes some pain. But here comes the empathy. Here comes the collaboration. You can help. You can educate them. You can know how to use those tools. You can teach them how to use those tools. It's a confusing space. There's tons of tools, and we'll get into that. But if your developers that you work with are anything like some of the developers that I've worked with, they need to know to eat their peas with a spoon. That's right, a spoon. I said it, a spoon, not a fork. The logistics of it work out better. Figure it out. Also, don't eat peas. Peas are disgusting. So, sometimes they get misused. Sometimes the tools get misused. Sometimes we use a tool for one thing, but it's actually better for another. So we need to learn the lesson from every tool as a hammer, which is actually two lessons. The first is that using the right tool is important. The second is that some tools are better than others at any given task, despite similar appearances and other high-level abstractions. The hammers that I put up there, you can use for lots of things. If the task at hand is to demolish a wall, there's like 3 of those that'd work, right? But one of those is better than the others, the sledge, right? So if you see someone doing demolition work with a claw hammer, depending on how they're going at it, hand them a sledgehammer. That's kind of what we're going for here. I want to talk through a case study. So this is actually an example from my company, from Workiva. we had a team, have a team, had a team. I don't know, we saw the developers. We built a product. I'll go there. We built a product. And this was the premise. The premise is that we wanted to do real-time analysis of our error logs. So we have logs coming in as a data stream. We have, basically the workload here is to analyze those logs and then notify a channel. There's two really important pieces here in the tool premise. One is that we want real-time analysis of error logs. So there's an urgency implied by real-time, and we've identified our data stream. All right, let's break this down. Let's talk about urgency. You have a date, a lunch date with a good friend next week. You can't make it. What are you going to do? Are you going to call him up? You could. You're probably just going to send him an email. You're going to send him a text. It's next week. It's lunch. It's not the end of the world. You and your significant other are expecting a child. It's go time. What's going to happen? You're going to get a phone call. If you don't pick up the phone, someone's going to come find you. Right? There's a very different level of urgency there. And urgency is kind of the point of this discussion. This is an international audience. For those of you who don't know the story of the boy who cried wolf, very simply put, it's kind of a story about alert fatigue, about false positives happening too often and dulling a sense of urgency in a town of people where a boy is crying wolf. I've just explained the whole thing. That wasn't my intention, but you kind of get the idea. The point here is that urgency is itself a time-sensitive commodity. There's only so much urgency we have that we can devote to a problem at any given time. So this then begs the question, what qualifies as urgent? Coming back to software, coming back to what we do, what qualifies as urgent? This is a scale. On one side, all systems green, everything's good, everything looks fine. On the other side, what do we have? What qualifies as the most urgent thing we have? I contest it is the answer to this question, which is what do you want to be paged for at 3 a.m.? What do you want to be notified about at 3 a.m.? Anything that doesn't pass the sniff test there, it's not the most urgent thing. The answer is the customer experience is impacted. Everything else falls into this. The statement that I am confident that the customer experience is not impacted, but maybe something doesn't look right. Maybe we need to fix something. Maybe we should look into something, or I don't know, wonder if this thing's going on, right? None of that you want to be woken up for at 3 a.m. because the customer experience is not impacted. All of that can wait until you get into the office. If you wake me up at 3 a.m. and say, something doesn't look right, and I say, is the customer experience impacted? And you say, no, I'm going to say, go the hell away. We're going to talk tomorrow morning. But this matters because we don't always hold we don't always hold our alerts to the same standard. And we should. In fact, we've had quite a few talks that have touched on that. So, getting to this problem then, one of the things as we look at this, this particular tool that we created is that our tool premise is here. The tool says, I want real-time analysis. Real-time analysis. If something happens, I want to know right now. Tell me immediately. The only time I want to know right away is if the customer experience is impacted. Any other piece of information, if it's not telling me or somehow feeding into answering the question of whether the customer experience is impacted, does not need real-time analysis. Run the queries every 5 minutes, every 10 minutes, every 2 days. Who cares, right? All right, there comes a point where it gets absurd, but it doesn't need to be real-time. But our data stream doesn't fit. Error logs. If an error log gets thrown, an error in your logging stream gets thrown, does that tell you that the customer experience is impacted? Maybe, probably not, right? Especially if you have high availability, if you have multiple instances, right? You have health checks on your running containers. So you have 5 boxes serving a given service, a given endpoint, right? One of them starts to go crazy. It's throwing tons of errors. It fails its health check. It gets killed. Another one gets brought up. Your service is healthy. The customer experience has not been impacted, but you have errors in your data stream. Who cares? There's errors in the data stream. It doesn't pass the sniff test. So that's one of the first problems with this tool, is that the data stream doesn't serve the purpose for the premise that's been defined. Let's talk about notification channels. Access channels. Same graph, same line, same scale. So we have different ways to access this data or to be notified. One of them is query interfaces, right? When do you go there? Sometimes you'll go there in a crisis. In fact, oftentimes you do. You'll want to look things up. But you don't have to be in a crisis. You can just be looking for data, right? The point is, and the difference between this and this and this and this and this is that on this end, you find the data. And on this end, the data finds you. That's a big, big difference. Because this one, if you don't pick up the phone, it's knocking on your door. It's pulling you out of bed, right? If you don't pick up the pager, your boss is getting paged. If he doesn't pick it up, then his boss is getting paged, right? And on up the line. These systems, these paging systems, are specifically there to be that thing that you can't ignore, right? So our tool premise is this. We need real-time analysis. Real-time analysis without real-time notification is not real-time. Why bother, right? Which is the problem, because the tool premise also says we're going to notify chat. Real-time analysis that you can look at whenever you want. Problematic. The people who built this tool weren't stupid, right? These are smart people solving a problem that they felt was really important to solve. And I'll say, we're still using this tool, and it is helpful, but not because of the real-time component. The people that use this tool essentially use the chat room that gets notified as a queue, as a ticket queue, right? They go and they look in and say, oh, that's something I want to look at. That's something I want to look at. So we have 2 options for reworking this. Number 1, so we can say, well, drop the real time. Doesn't have to be real time. We're just doing analysis, which, by the way, reduces cost by tons. And our notification channel is tickets. Let's just make tickets. We'll file it to a ticket queue. The second, if we stick with, if we stick with the idea that this needs to be real time, then the stream we're analyzing is wrong. And we need to be analyzing synthetic transaction monitors, and we need to be analyzing telemetry and composite streams. These are all the things, these are the magic bullets that tell us when we want to know, is the customer impacted? This is where we go. These are real-time streams. And then we need to go to the pager. Chat doesn't cut it. Chat doesn't come find you at 3 a.m. But this is confusing. This space is confusing, right? These are smart people. These are smart people. These are developers who want to solve a problem, but the space is confusing. We have lots of data streams, right? There's logs, telemetry, analytics, tracing, synthetic monitors, composite streams, tons of other things that I could probably even mention here, but those are the broad strokes, right? We also have tons of tools. We have Splunk, we have Datadog. VictorOps kind of does some analysis. There's some pre-processing you can do there. Insight is our internal tool. Signals is an internal tool. It does synthetic transaction monitoring. We use Stackdriver for analytics and BigQuery and Data Studio as well. We also have all these access channels. So query interfaces, dashboards, emails, tickets, chats, pages. I wish we had shot callers. We don't. And we have use cases, right? Sometimes we look at these things for crisis response, sometimes just for performance optimization, for quality iteration, for debugging, for product research, right? All these things align in a way that's too complicated to put in one slide, but more or less along that urgency axis. And they interact with different data streams. And it's even more complex because the whole space is evolving. When we look back at these tools, well, Splunk is a great log platform, but they're also moving into analytics and into telemetry. And they can also alert, and they can create tickets. And Datadog is primarily a metrics and telemetry, but now they're getting into, they have synthetics that they're getting into, like synthetic front-end transactions. So we need a holistic approach here. We need some tool that brings it all together. Everybody knows that. We don't really have it yet. But the space is evolving, and this is just going to get more and more confusing and complex. Maybe. Hopefully it doesn't. Somebody comes along that actually unites them all, and we all kind of walk off into the sunset singing hallelujah. But it's all moving and changing. So the first lesson is use tools. Use the right tools, and use the right tools the right way. This is what you have the ability to take to your organizations and help promote. This is how we show our empathy, by working with smart people and helping them learn things that we've learned the hard way, and how we collaborate with them. I'm going to start moving quick because I got the 15-minute bell, and I still actually have a fair amount to go through. Back to the crowd. What are these? A hammer, thank you. Smart ass. A boat with what? Seashells? Barnacles, right? So, I didn't hear barnacles, otherwise I would have said, you're wrong! They're alerts. But they are barnacles. But they're meant to symbolize alerts here. We have a problem. We have a problem. You probably do too. Which is that alerts accrete over time, like barnacles. We get them, we don't often lose them. Things get more noisy, not less. We encounter more problems, we try to create more monitors. When this goes to the absolute worst place, we essentially create a mechanical Turk, where instead of solving problems, we just throw more and more monitors and alerts at it until we just have somebody full-time acknowledging alerts and telling them to shut up and trying to determine what's actually real and what's not. That's the bad place. We need a system. We need an SDLC. We have SDLCs for code, and we should actually be defining our monitors in code. It's possible. You can do it. There are systems out there. In fact, we're engaging now with Terraform to start creating our monitors and alerts via Terraform. And your alerts, just like all the other code, all of the other, when I talk about the subtitle for this talk, which is Incurring Human Costs in Engineering. Every time you add a noisy alert with a high signal-to-noise ratio, you are spending human capital. And it's pricey, and it has consequences. So lesson number 2 is you need an SDLC for your alerts. Lesson number 3, this is a burning house. Who here thinks that the smoke detector is at fault for the burning house? Good answer. Nobody. Smart asses again. All right. The smoke detector did not start the fire unless it was wired improperly, but still that comes back to the, electrician or somebody, right? I'm going to be quick with this one because it's just simple, which is don't blame failures in monitoring for failures in engineering. This is how we get more barnacles. How many of you have been, you don't need to raise your hands because I know it's everybody. How many of you have been in a retro for some incident and someone says, we need more monitors. That's what we need, right? Yeah, hands go up, hallelujah, right? But that's not the answer always. Sometimes it is. Sometimes you say, yes, we should have a monitor for this, but we need to fix the underlying engineering problem that created this, right? You can say, yeah, because the monitor was faulty, 3 people died in the fire. Oh, that's awful. It sucks, right? Monitors can help mitigate blast radius, but they cannot solve problems in engineering. You have to solve the problems in engineering. The fire killed the 3 people. Yes, you could have done better and had better monitors, but it's not the fault of the monitoring. That's how you get into a mechanical Turk scenario. All right, it's story time. So gather round, take a seat. Did the camera follow? Hey. When I started getting alerts, when I went on call, the first week that I was on call for 10 days, and I had 1,000 alerts, pages. My phone rang 1,000 times in 10 days. I should be holding a flashlight and roasting a s'mores. This is a horror story, right? 1,000 times in 10 days. So 100 a day, right? Divided by 24 hours. So, rough math here. One every 15 minutes or so. Nonstop. It wasn't distributed that way, right? But you get the idea. It was awful. And we had to learn some things the hard way. This was a very trying time for me personally. We had just changed up how we were doing things in the organization and how the on-call responsibilities were sort of distributed. So I walked into this having no clue. We had operations processes that had gone off the rails. We had alerts with awful signals-to-noise ratio. So this was my baptism by fire, you could say. This is not something that anybody should have to go through, and it will lead to burnout. If you have that over any sustained period of time, you will lose people. By some miracle, we did not. But we tackled it, and we had to decrease the noise very, very quickly in order to do that. Because we're not machines, right? This is part of the problem, is that we work with machines all the time. We're writing code, we're writing infrastructure as code. The things that we interact with, the product of our work is machines doing tasks. But when we put humans on the other side of that, sometimes we can treat the humans as if they're machines. But we're not, right? Are we highly available? Absolutely not. Are we fault tolerant? No, we're faulty and intolerant. Are we consistent and predictable? No. Are we performance optimized? No, we're actually optimized for minimal effort. I want to do the least work possible. Machines have no feelings. We are constantly crippled by emotions. And the machine does not love you. The human probably also doesn't. So that's all right. So we're kind of comparable there. But the conclusion is that you're not a machine. And we need to be cognizant of that. We need to think about that as we create the systems that humans interact with on the other side. What I experienced, and what we all experience when we go through very costly processes around on-call, is fatigue. And it manifests in a couple of ways. You really can get post-traumatic stress from being on call in that way. There are probably people here who their heartbeat jumps a little, they freak out a little. You have a mini panic attack when your phone goes off with an alert, right? When you get a page, that can have a real effect. The other way that it can impact us is to basically rob us of our compassion. There's actually a well-known phenomenon, which is secondary stress disorder, which is where essentially after you have been exposed to someone else's trauma, like babysitting a prod system that is broken a lot, you start to lose empathy. If you've worked with people who are kind of these grizzled ops veterans, maybe you're them, I'll apologize in advance if you are. These people that are just kind of famously, they don't care. They have no empathy for you. Do you know how they got there? We probably broke them. We submitted them to these systems, these noisy, awful systems that didn't give a shit about them for long enough. They stopped giving a shit about us and about everything else. It's awful. It's awful, and it's tragic. This is cortisol. Cortisol is not your friend. It can be. I shouldn't be so simplistic with it, but I'm running out of time. Cortisol is a hormone. It's a response biologically when we're under stress, and when we're under a lot of stress for a long time, we have heightened levels of cortisol in our body. It wreaks havoc if it stays at heightened levels for a long time. This actually gets into the biological upper limit for how often we can be exposed to pages, to urgent things. If you look in the SRE handbook, I think they say somewhere between 6 and 8 hours. Every 6 and 8 hours, you can get one page and care about it and respond to it with the level of urgency that it needs. Beyond that, cortisol does bad things to us. So, unsustainable on-call practices promote burnout. Practice and process can change, but that takes time. So what I want to get into now is if you find yourself in this situation where your processes are bad, but you think they can change, you need some way to cope with it in the short term, the short to medium term. Because your desires do not make it change. Your desires do not make it better right away. You can help make things better, but if you're committed to the organization, if you want to be there, you need some way to deal with it. The hero of our story, this is oxytocin. Oxytocin is sometimes called the love hormone. When women give birth, they have huge rushes of oxytocin. It promotes a bond with their child. It helps create bonds. You get a rush of it when you do something good for someone else. Give someone a high five, and probably not a huge amount, but yeah, give someone a high five. Do something good for someone else. Oxytocin makes you feel good. It also can help protect us from some of the effects of cortisol. If you have more oxytocin in you, you can actually endure more cortisol. So, there's a big scary world. What that means is that you, if you are in this situation, you need to create a safe space. There's whole talks on this, right? Creating safe spaces, what it means to create a safe space, to be in a safe space. If you're a manager of a team that does on-call, this is your job, you create this safe space. If you are in a team like this, that's also your job, if you want to keep your job. Because the reality is you will burn out otherwise. If you're in this situation. It's a fact. It's an undeniable, there's a timeline, right? You could plot it out if we had the data. Level of stress versus time until somebody quits or moves on, burns out. This is where oxytocin lives. So the lesson here is that sustainable on-call embraces the humanity in ourselves and other, and it has to come from you. You have to promote that level of closeness and bonding within your team to help offset that. You have to be a part of that. It's not all your manager's job. If you're the manager, then yeah, it's mostly your job, but other people should help. Take some personal responsibility if you're not the manager, because it needs your involvement. All right, so in conclusion, teach your organization to use tools. Teach them to use the right tools, and teach them to use the right tools in the right way. Rationalize your alerting with an SDLC process. Don't just, when you hit the right scale, and by the right scale, I mean you've been successful enough and you have a lot of developers now, these things can get out of hand really quickly. You need a process to wrap the creation and management of your monitors and alerts. Don't blame failures in monitoring for failures in engineering. Don't create the mechanical Turk, and don't let anyone else do that. If when you see this, you call it. It's like a single point of failure, right? In an architecture review, call it. Single point of failure. You're blaming a failure in monitoring. And number 4, fight to maintain sanity and on-call by investing in team relationships. Invest in team relationships. If you don't like your team, this is going to be hard. If you don't like your team and you're in a really bad space and on-call, you're going to be looking for a new job soon, so give me a call. I'm only half joking there. Actually, I'd really like for you to give me a call. We are hiring. Did I mention that? We're hiring? We're hiring. But we do this, all these things, in order to have and show empathy for others, create and reinforce the spirit of collaboration, build bridges between our organizations, not walls, and embrace automation as a force multiplier. And that's my talk.
This was awesome. Let's give a big round of applause for Matthew.